All right, so over the next 8 minutes, I'm going to blow your mind when it comes to compression. If you're at all confused about compression, stick with me because we're going to talk about what compression is actually doing in your mix and how to control it. All right, so the purpose of compression is to impact dynamics. Control dynamics. There are two kinds of dynamics that we can control. We can control macro dynamics and microdynamics. Well, let me define dynamics for us. Dynamics is the relative difference between the loudest and softest part of audio. Macrodynamics is between parts or performances. Or performance, singular. So, for example, if I have a vocal part that has a verse and a chorus, the chorus might be way louder than the verse. So therefore, the performance has lots of macro dynamics. Alternatively, microdynamics is the difference between the loudest and softest part of an audio of a single note. So, a note, right, if I say ba, that is a single note, and the b part is much louder than the ah part. So, ba, right, you have a loud attack, softer quiet part after. In macrodynamics, we have a couple notes, for example. This is a waveform here. And do one more. Okay, so we can tell these three notes have a lot of macrodynamics. And to define this further, the relative difference between the two, so say, let me get another color here. Say this note here is, the peak here is -5 decibels. And then this note here, the peak is -10 decibels. So the dynamics that we have here, the macro dynamics we have is approximately 5 decibels. Because that's the difference between the quietest note and the loudest note of this particular take. And with compression, the goal with compression is to be able to control these dynamics. So if we look at these two notes, if we want this take to be more similar relative to itself, we can use dynamics to turn this entire note down, the whole thing. So instead of being 5 decibels, it could be maybe -8 decibels. So now the difference between these two notes is only 2 decibels. So we can control the macrodynamics to make the part fit better in the mix. So because, for example, this note might be poking out of the mix and it's too loud, but this note might be too quiet. So we can use compression to control that dynamics and make the entire part more even. The thing to note here is that we're not changing the microdynamics between this part of the note and this part of the note with this type of compression. We're compressing the entire note down so that these two are relatively the same, but it doesn't ruin or impact the microdynamics of this particular note. All right, so that is macrodynamics. Let's dive into microdynamics for a minute. So microdynamics is impacting a single note. So we have a sound wave here. Let's just, and there are two main parts of a note, right? So we have this part here, which is the louder part, and that is known as the transient. You'll hear this term a lot, and if you don't know what it is, it's the loudest part of the note, usually at the front. Always at the front, actually. It's the initial attack of the note. And then, whoops, wrong color. We also have the tail of the note. So normally the transient is really short right up front, tail's longer. This kind of gives pitch information. This gives rhythm information to the human. So the key thing that I want you to walk away this video with is we can control microdynamics using compression. For example, if we want to dive in here and make this audio wave sound closer to the listener. So for example, I might do this on a lead vocal that is just getting lost in the mix and I want to bring it forward. I can increase the transient volume relative to the tail volume. Because things that have more microdynamics sound closer to the human ear. Because if you can think of it as if I'm standing right next to you and talking to you, I'm going to have a lot more dynamic range than if I stand across the room and yell at you. I'm going to have less dynamic range in between the various words that I say and the microdynamics of the specific syllables of those words. So anyway, that being said, I can increase the transient relative to the tail. So now I've turned this down and I've turned this part up. Now that sound is going to sound a lot closer to me. It's also going to have a lot more attack to it. So it's going to sound punchier in the mix. And definitely going to stand out a little bit more relative to other instruments that have less microdynamics. Alternatively, we can also reduce the microdynamics by turning this transient down and the tail up. I'll erase that. So the new waveform after compression will look something like this. So you can tell, even though the tail didn't really change in any of these, the relative difference between the transient and the tail had a huge difference. So essentially now we've turned this transient down and then this one up. So this type of compression is actually going to push things back further in the mix, although it's going to sound thicker, especially if I use some makeup gain to make that, essentially make the tail bigger and keep the attack the same, the transient the same. This is now going to sound super thick. However, it's going to have less microdynamics. It's going to sound a little bit further away from the listener. But it's going to emphasize, again, that tail. We can all do this through compression. If you want the specifics of how to achieve these various goals of compression, I have a handy-dandy compression guide that will walk through this along with how to actually achieve that with the attack and release settings on your compressor. So that link to the guide is down below, or you can just go to dinosaurdogstudio.com/compression. That's dinosaurdogstudio.com/compression, and you can pick up the guide in order to learn how to actually do this with your compressor. I hope this was helpful for you in understanding what our actual goals with compression are and what it actually does to the audio when we use certain styles of compression. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.